Hello, everybody, and welcome to Human Happy Hour. I'm one of your hosts, Rena Goldman, and Jayson Argento is your other host. Hey, Jayson.
Hey there.
And today, our guest is Ben Carollo. She is the host of bleepblompben on Twitch and of Galaxy Brain on TYT's Twitch channel. She's a former Air Force intel analyst and veteran, has 5 degrees, and has managed congressional and state Senate campaigns and ran for the Minnesota House of Representatives. So, welcome, Ben.
Hi, how's it going?
I know. We- it's I have the same thing. It's like you're talking, chit-chatting, and then you get back on, you're like, hi, how are you?
Yeah, right. Seriously.
Was that too, like, I put on my journalism hat?
It
Too
was
much?
amazing. We messed it up because we were like, hello.
Yeah, I don't think I've like heard my resume out loud from somebody else before. Usually people like hang on to one or two things.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. No, most people kind of like they'll pick one thing, right? Like, oh, she's trans. Oh, she's a veteran, or oh, she's got a master's degree, kind of whatever's most relevant to the situation. It's kind of like the first time I've ever heard like a whole intro of like all of the things. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. Well, we're interested in all of the things, right? Like, that's why we have you here, right? Like, you got a cool background.
Oh, yeah. And also, it's interesting you said that because, like, I was trying to make the thumbnail, and my ignorance, I thought transgender woman should be important in the thumbnail. And everybody was like, well, maybe that isn't what it is. And so it's one of those things where I'm not up on it enough to know exactly what to do and what to say. And sometimes I get a little lost with that, but I'm very flexible in on how to change it. So I changed it to what it says now. What are your thoughts on that? Like when like, is transgender, should that be something that's prominent?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it really depends on the context, right? So like for example, like if we were doing like if that was most of the content was talking about transition and stuff like that, then that would make like perfect sense and be fine. For me, for the most part, right, it's not like a highlight in a lot of the stuff that I do, just because like I'm not like a world expert on like trans issues or anything. Like I just, coincidentally trans, right? Like
Ah, okay.
it's not necessarily my field of expertise outside of my like general knowledge of like the social sciences and like sociology and stuff. um but even then, that's part of just like a broader framework of understanding gender between cultures throughout history, not necessarily like the specific issues that are like facing people in the United States today. Um so like that was the topic, if the topic was like about trans stuff, then it makes perfect sense and it's totally on board. But there is sort of like this larger trend, I think, of basically if somebody is trans, right, or if they're queer in one way or another, um, that kind of like being like their header and that kind of like replacing everything that exists within their resume, which like a lot of trans people really, really don't like for very understandable reasons. I mean, think about it, that would be like like I know this is an extreme example, but imagine somebody who's interviewing Barack Obama and they just were like they put in the header like interview with like a black man in America, right? Well, obviously he's got a little bit more qualifications than that, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah,
um
totally.
yeah,
Hmm.
so yeah, and a lot of trans women are like, like epidemiologists, psychologists, doctors, teachers, lawyers, all these things. So like really, really impressive careers, impressive people. um and a lot of the times when they get brought on like television or something, they're just sort of introduced as trans women, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much what they corrected me on because in my opinion I was like it's super important because I think it's important for people to know hey, this might be something that can make that can have more information, about, because I think it's something that still needs more information out there so people can be more normalized to it so that they could stop being such weirdos,
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. I mean, this is a big struggle, even like within the trans community, because like, I mean, because like with transness, right, there's a safety that comes with being cis passing, right? And
cis
so
what?
like a lot of cis passing, like passing, like people would look at you and assume that you're cisgender. They wouldn't assume that you're trans.
Okay.
Um, so like there's like a safety in that, and there's like a lot of trans women who for them passing is like really really important, and so clocking somebody, which is like sort of recognizing them as trans, is something that is kind of impolite to do. It's not something that's very polite to do, but like obviously somebody that is trans, and I know a lot of other trans people feel the same way, we like to know and see other trans people succeeding in different aspects of life. We like to see other trans people, living their best life. And so there's that tension there where it's like, you know, we want to be able to find trans content creators, trans experts, trans folks in general who are like doing really awesome stuff. But we also don't want to be like clocking people, um, and sort of like calling people out, so to speak, on their transness just because like we want to see or hear about their experience or success. So like
Hmm.
your thoughts, I think, are perfectly legitimate. Of like, hey, here's a trans woman with this resume that we're going to interview. That's fantastic. But also at the same time, the tension with how do we make sure that being trans isn't her entire identity when it comes to like interviewing somebody? And so that like it's a very very understandable tension sort of between those two things.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. Jayson, I like to go with whatever the person wants to do because like everybody's different.
Hmm.
So, I'll lean into like, how would you like to, identify or, and if you like what you were saying, like if being trans is front and center and that's part of the interview, then it would make sense that somebody would want, to put that front and center, but then some people don't. And um, so, then you would go with the other accolades and things, that we would be talking about. But yeah, when in doubt, always ask and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
preferably before the stream, right? It's like what we but so, should we dive into
Yeah,
like
please
you have
do.
all of these interesting, things in your bio and we kind of want to like connect the dots, right? Like how did you get from military, right, like to then going to cybersecurity to Twitch streamer? Can you kind of like walk us through some of that?
Yeah, okay. So so I guess it all kind of started off like I started off, I technically signed up for the military when I was 17 years old. I wasn't even 18. I had to get my parents to sign on board. Um, and like there were some hangups, so I ended up like not actually joining until I was 18 and like going to like basic training. And I went in with the intention of becoming a geospatial intelligence analyst, which could mean a lot of things, but it ended up meant mostly working with drones for a period of time. I actually got to work with like satellite stuff and got to do like a bunch of like humanitarian missions and things like that, and that was really cool. Um, but working with drones was sort of like most of what people in my job were doing and what I spent a lot of time doing. Um, and so with that, um, I mean, when you work with drones, you like see a lot of things uh,
When you
that are
say
not great,
drones, do you mean the big military ones? Like you're not talking like little drones, right?
Yeah, like predators, reapers, stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
They're actually I didn't know what they were called. They're called predators and reapers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's
Death
like a
Raiders.
handful of them. Predators, reapers. I think the global hawk is one of them. Or there's a bunch, right? There's tons and tons of like different drones. Um, but I mean, I'm certain you might have seen some of the footage of like the camera flying around looking at a random building or something and then like firing missiles and whatnot. um it's a really really difficult job, and in it you really, like, if you're paying attention, right, if you're paying attention, you really see and understand a lot about how the United States goes about our foreign policy around the world. And it's not great to say the very least. Like the harshest lesson that I unfortunately learned the hard way, as opposed to like reading books like maybe I should have before I joined, um, is that most of the people um, that like the United States labels as terrorists around the world are basically just random people living their life. I mean, think about it, right? Like, think about this for a second. Like, if you're watching people who you have no understanding of their culture, you have no understanding of like what their daily life is like for the average person, how are you supposed to pick out what is suspicious and what isn't suspicious, right? Like, going to your family's house for like a wedding or just a dinner party or something like that could all of a sudden turn into like a secretive meeting or something. Like picking up groceries could turn into like secret meetings at the farmers market, basically. um and so one of the things that you see in that, if you're paying attention and you actually take the time to like learn about the different cultures around the world that you are like, obviously involved in, you realize really, really quickly that like the sort of evidence that we've built against particular individuals to like justify drone strikes and things like that is very, very dicey, and it's all built on, to be honest, assumptions. I mean, think about it. If your job is, I mean, think about it like this. If your job is to create a list of targets, right, to build a target deck, your boss is going to tell you, hey, we need 20, we need 10 for this mission, right? We need 10 targets. So, like, the first couple are definitely going to be legit. You're going to have tons of evidence for it. You're going to have like a whole case and like profiles and things like that. But you've got to fill it up, right? You've got to fill up all the 10 or 20. And so as you go down the list, you start to see that everything is kind of more vague, right? And it just sort of gets more vague and more uncertain. But that's their job, right? Their job is to fill that target deck. And so that's exactly what they're going to do, regardless as to whether or not they have like the justification or the information to put people on that list. Um, and so that really is like the heart of the problem. And a lot of people don't take the time to understand that. Like, a lot of people, I even had one person while I was in the military try to make the case to me, try to say that, like, oh no, we definitely send people down there to check to make sure it was the right person every time. And I'm like, have you ever seen those people? Have you ever seen those people? Like, so they have really ridiculous assumptions, even the people who work in this. But if you pay a little bit of attention, like, you start to realize kind of how terrible it is. And knowing that just becomes like a very, very stressful reality, um, that is just not something that you can really live with. And so from that, I transferred from active duty to the Guard because I just wanted to not work with drones anymore. And that's when I switched to cybersecurity. Um, from that, while I was in the Guard for cybersecurity, that's when I started getting into politics, like running that congressional campaign, running a state senate campaign, running for office myself, all with like the hope of like changing things and like making things better. And then in that, you start to see the problems with the structure of the way that elections work, the problems with the structure of the way that like politics works in the United States. There's very much like this sort of good old boys club that exists. And not only that, but there's a lot of careerism where the sort of careerists are the ones that like, they get dragged in, right, from their internships, right? They'll do unpaid internships with like, senators or congressmen or something like that. And there's very much a pipeline. There's very much a pipeline from like specific colleges to work for specific, electeds, to then running for office yourself. And so it's a very sort of tight knit group of people that, for the most part, are deeply interested in careerism. They're not really, a lot of them are sort of just rich people that see politics as like just like an edgy sort of career, and not really as like this like life impacting, life altering thing. Um, and so during that time, I finished my master's degree, and I started Twitch streaming. Um, and that is like really where, like, a couple years ago, where I really um started diving into, because at that point, right, obviously I had gotten, 3 different degrees, my undergraduate social sciences degree, my 2 associates degree. So when I was finishing my master's degree, I I started reading more specifically like Marxist literature, and like like that just fit into everything that I like previously understood about like how politics works, how the military works, how imperialism works, and how like capitalism works broadly. And all of these things, like really the Marxist analysis was the one that sort of like wrapped it all in a neat little bow after I had already read people, you know, like Noam Chomsky and Naomi Klein and things like that. None of them ever really, I think, fully explain like the structural reasons for the problems that exist that they talk about in like their books. Um, and so, and then, you know, I got very, very lucky. I did this like Twitch pitch competition with UIT and they picked me up, and that's kind of what I've been doing ever since.
That's a really great journey. I think that you want, and also I would say like probably not a lot of people have that level of awakening. Right? Like they will see things, but might not necessarily connect the dots and say that, oh, this is really bad. Maybe I should dig deeper. Or maybe I should, try to do
Yeah,
something about it. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of people really, I mean, like most people don't get the experience of like being behind the scenes and seeing how everything works, like both from like inside the military, how that works, right? And when you're in intel, it's a little bit different than even your average military experience because, like, you know, I would bump into like four-star generals. I even have a photograph somewhere in my apartment of me with a Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, right? So, like, you know, when you're in intel, it's kind of a different world than your sort of typical like service member. And then in politics, right, a lot of people don't see the sort of behind the scenes of like how campaigning works and like how like people get chosen for different positions within campaign offices and things like basic things like, for example, right, like legislation. When legislation is being written, very often what happens, especially at the state legislature level, is you'll have like your elected politician, their name will be on the bill and it will say that they wrote the bill. But the reality is that there are legal offices within legislatures where they're the ones who are usually really writing the bill. And with very bureaucratic positions, will very often sort of filter what goes through their office to sort of match precedent. And it's just really, really funny because you will get instances where like those people in those legal offices will basically say things along the lines of, oh, there's no precedent for like a law like this, so we can't really write this or put it forward. I don't think, we can really do this. And it's always like with bills that are like trying to help people, right? Like basically, like I've had a few instances where I've suggested things and basically gotten pushback where it's like, essentially, no, there's no precedent for actually helping people with our political system. I don't think you understand how this works. And so, like, even when it comes to the way legislators go about their job, most of them don't even fully understand how their positions work. They will sort of like segment themselves off into individual committees and they'll show up to vote, but a lot of the representatives don't go through the effort of like really critically analyzing the environment that they are in, because a lot of these representatives came through this sort of like careerist pipeline, and they just assume that the system is working without taking any sort of deeper look at it.
yeah, and even to have an internship like that is unpaid, that's a privilege. So
Yeah.
that automatically, I mean, I can even, I mean, I'm okay now, but I could, when I was in school, like in college, I didn't have an internship during school because they were like, oh, well, we don't do paid internships. And I'm like, oh, well, I work and I have to pay rent. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, like, so that's, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a part of the you're shut out, from the beginning there.
I'm just stuck on the fact that I did the Twitch pitch and you beat me.
That's
Just
the
ringing in my
takeaway.
head. No, I did though. But yeah, I actually had never heard anything else about it, and I was like, did that ever actually have anything happen? Because I never heard anything like I even looked and stuff. But I'm glad that someone won, and I'm glad that you won. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, yeah, and I'm kind of stuck on this, like, so when you were talking about like those missions and they have to pick like how many people, or how many threats. Where do these arbitrary numbers come from? Like you have to identify 10 or 20 or
Yeah, well, so, and this is where, like, if you look at the system and structure, it all makes perfect sense in a sort of like really horrific kind of way. Um, because, so let's go to like the commanding officers of the squadrons that run these missions. Their OPR, right, their officer performance report, is basically going to be ranked against other officer performance reports, and that's going to have a big influence on promotions. So they want their OPR to look really, really good. And the best way to do that is to show that they're already in charge of a lot of work, right? And they're already doing a lot of things. So they want EKIA, right? Enemies killed in action. They want those numbers to be high. They want the number of missions to be very high. They want like, they want a lot of birds in the air to prove that they're in charge of a lot of things. Well, so their individual incentive is to make sure that there are as many flights as possible, right? Doesn't really matter whether or not there's a high threat or anything like that. They just want to keep the mission going, right? They want to keep the flight going. So from them, it is really an issue of we need to make sure that we have enough targets to justify flying this aircraft, because if we don't have enough targets, then they won't let us fly the mission, right? Because it's kind of like a lot of use it or lose it budget system that the military uses. So there's this constant incentive to keep these aircraft going. So from them, it's we need to justify this mission. We need to justify this bird. We don't want to lose this bird. So they'll go down obviously to like the next layer below them and say, we need to keep justifying these birds. And then they will do the math of like, okay, well, that means we need 20 targets. That means we need 10 targets. That means we need, whatever. And then they will send that to the people who build those target decks.
I have heard this before from other people that were in the military. We have a base near us, and somebody said that they were in charge of fuel for the base, and they would get a budget, and if they realized that by the end of the year they had too much fuel left, they would actually just waste the fuel so that their budget wouldn't go down for next year. It's like, really? Like, that's just amazing to me, the wastefulness
Yeah,
of that kind of stuff,
yeah.
and having to make the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, and it gets really grim when you're talking about like wasting fuel is already bad because climate change is destroying our planet. But then when you're talking about like flying
Targets.
aircraft that have weapons on them, right? And basically saying we need to drop this many bombs. Otherwise, my performance report isn't going to look good, and otherwise we're going to lose an aircraft and have a smaller budget next year, right? That's when you like literally literally people are basically dying not for freedom or anything like that. It's for people's performance reports.
Which obviously has to do with money that the military industrial complex is trying to make and have influence on the people in charge. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but it seems like that's probably what's going on.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Like, because that's the thing, right? Like, the more these aircraft fly, the more we need to buy these aircraft. And so, like, there's this, the structure is built on purpose to make sure that the military budget is always expanding, that there's no option for it not to expand, because people's very careers depend on keeping this level of funding that we have this year and then adding more next year, right? So long as people are hungry for promotions in the military, which of course they will be, there will always be this drive, not only from the military, but also from the military industrial complex that profits off of that, for ever increasing military budgets, regardless as to whether or not there's any actual threat out there.
Yes. I just can't imagine being the guy or the person that is like, oh, gotta drop more bombs because my performance review, like
You
I
wouldn't get
do.
the job, Rena. That's
Yeah,
why.
I wouldn't get the
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
But
Well, like that's
do people
yeah.
have a sense of, like, did you meet people that had any kind of sense of like, this probably isn't good, or like those people are just not going into that line of work? Like they're just sort of fine
Um,
with it.
a lot of people don't like, so there's a structural blindness in this, right? There's a structural blindness, right? So I think the point where it'd be easiest to know this would be to be the person building the target deck. Um, because like the people who are like the commanders, they don't necessarily know all the details of these target decks. They don't know whether or not they know that the target decks are being filled, but they don't necessarily know what they're being filled with. They assume that everything is all good intel. Um, and so there's a structural blindness. And even the people who are like responsible for like carrying out the missions, who are like watching the feeds and things like that, they don't necessarily know that that information might not be all that great. Um, and so, like, the closer you get to that, the more you're gonna have a sense of it. But like the reality is that it is designed in such a way that there is a blindness that exists from one step to the other, so that it really takes somebody who has had experience or just like asks other people um what they're doing in their jobs before you really like get a full picture. It's designed to make sure that nobody is really getting the full picture from one position.
Whew.
Wow. And is this what inspired you to run for office?
Yeah, yeah, it was a big reason. Like because the person that I ran his congressional campaign, his name's Ian. Um, he was also in the military. He worked with me, right? We worked together. And so like that was one of the hopes was to like, actually call stuff out like this. It's one of the reasons why he like ran for Congress. Um, that was kind of the hope. But then once you see and you actually try to run for office and you see like how the system works inside of like the electoral sphere, it's really, really hard not to get like very doomer. And you would basically have to build an entire career around getting into Congress, right? It would take basically like decades of work to get to the point where you've like entrenched yourself within these like careerist institutions to be able to even get close to having the type of financing and like other political support that you need to just run an effective campaign. Because basically, if you're running for Congress, the media will not look at your campaign unless you have $1 million.
Yep. So given all of that, like what gives you hope, right? Like for any kind like or does anything like for any kind of like positive change, and this is like if it's too hard to get in, right? Like what do you think people's best chance of affecting change might be?
Um, okay, so this is where it gets really difficult and really complicated. On some level, I guess we'll start small and we'll go big from there. At the smallest level, like if you want to make change in the electoral sphere, it's a lot easier to like break into like a city council meeting and like push for like bigger structural changes. Like, so for example, right, the real estate lobby is a huge, huge lobby, and it's a huge impediment to like change, right? It's a huge impediment to change. Like real estate lobbyists, people who are, like big landlords and these corporate investors and stuff like that, they tend to be some of the most reactionary. So if you're a city council member and you want to like deal with some issues there, you could literally push for like land reform projects. You could push for like housing cooperatives. You could push for, bread and butter stuff that improves people's material needs, that helps get landlords out of town. So that like once the capital is sort of no longer there and things have been switched to a more cooperative model, then all of a sudden you're going to see change in Congress from the representatives that are representing that area. Because, of course, if the real estate lobby isn't in town, they're going to have a lot harder time influencing your local congressional campaigns. But then there's the more material aspect, because this is where I think one of the most important things for people to understand, that is the politics of the material, right? Not the politics of the procedural. The reality is that, like, if you imagine like a critical industry like transportation, right? A few workers at a few different train stations, for example, that do like shipping and handling, um, they could basically shut down the entire economy of a city if they really wanted to and they wanted to organize. And there's a few other industries where, um, workers could do that together. So like coordinated strikes, right? And workers basically like doing strikes or slowdowns, even boycotts, things like that can make a really, really huge difference, because the reality is, if we know that politicians by and large work for giant corporations, and these giant corporations start to see the economy go a direction that they don't like it, and we recognize that these companies can't make any money without the workers that are working there, well, then you start to realize that a couple rail workers going on strike could basically, like, I mean, honestly, if every rail worker in the United States went on strike tomorrow, we would have Medicare for all overnight, if that's what they were asking for. Um, because whenever people in power are scared of their bank accounts, then all of a sudden change happens really, really fast. Um, but on the more global scale, like, the reality is, like, the one beacon of hope that I see in the world, and I know a lot of people might react to this um, pretty starkly, but the beacon of hope that I see in the world, it really is China, right? What is happening right now is China is approaching the world, right? The entire world with a trade policy of peace, right? A trade policy of neutrality, basically, where, they will, they'll do trade deals with people like Duterte, right? Who's an extreme sort of right-wing figure, but then they'll also like do trade with, Vietnam, Cuba, Bolivia, right? And so really China is going to the global south and basically offering, hey, through economic partnerships, we can sort of free you from the structural adjustment programs from the IMF and the World Bank and things like that, that force your countries into poverty. Um, and, if we have a close enough partnership, the United States won't feel comfortable invading your country because they don't want to have to deal with any type of economic sanctions or speed bumps that might come from like sanctions from China, obviously. And so when you combine that with the fact that like China really is the only major world power that's taking climate change seriously, over the past 20 years, like China has been responsible for lifting about 800 million people out of poverty. Like these things, right? Even though obviously it's not a perfect country, when it comes to their relationship with the rest of the world, they are really eroding the United States' ability to be the sort of dictator of global economic policy. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now with a lot of the instability we're seeing in the United States as a result of the fact that we don't really have the ability to bully other countries around the same way that we used to. And so the multipolarity is really creating an opening for sort of a more democratic world. The scary part about that, though, is that with the United States finally having a contender again for like global influence over the world economy, because we have to like start playing fair instead of playing with bombs. um, Now the United States is becoming more unstable, so it looks like things in the United States are going to get a lot worse very, very quickly, very, very fastly. But at the same time, for the rest of the world, now they see a world where instead of being forced to do what the United States wants, they can play a game where they can actually bargain between China and the United States and develop their own path.
Wow. So the key is to get regular people to get to rally and get together and actually do something like what Bernie almost did. um,
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Well, I mean, with that, it just is really difficult because, like, a lot of Americans, like, I mean, for what I said about China, for example, there's a lot of Americans that have like really strong ideas about what China is. And the reason for that is a lot of Red Scare propaganda, right? That's not to say it's a perfect place, but that Red Scare propaganda, like, is really, really deep seated in the United States. And so, like, when you have people running around talking about, like, oh, all these socialist countries, they're evil dictatorships, even though, like, by any reasonable measure, they're democracies, right? Like Cuba is a perfect example of this. They actually just rewrote their entire constitution like 2 or 3 years ago, and in a public referendum, something around like 90% of the population voted in favor of their new constitution. So like, you have these like democracies that we try to paint as like these evil, like authoritarian dictatorships or whatever. And so whenever you have people like organizing workplaces, like the sort of anti-communist sentiment that exists within a lot of Americans really, really is one of the biggest barriers, because like a lot of people, when it comes to labor unions are terrified of being labeled as socialist. So they end up structuring themselves in such a way that is more amenable to those who are in power here in the United States. And so when you have labor unions that are less willing to be confrontational, then you get this working class sentiment against labor unions where they feel like the labor union isn't fighting for them. But at the same time, if the labor union was fighting for them a lot harder, then all of a sudden you start to see all these people saying, oh, that's communism, how dare you? And so that really, I think, becomes one of the biggest challenges is sort of getting people to recognize that capitalism isn't working, but not only is capitalism not working, but like socialism is actually a pretty good option. And so as long as people are taking socialism off the table and they're refusing to engage with any type of like Marxist politics, their anti-capitalism has nowhere to go. Their anti-capitalism really has nowhere to go. So it's hard to like build any type of unified effort because then all of a sudden it becomes a situation of herding cats. Everybody wants to reinvent socialism without the word socialism. They've all got their own unique ideas about how to do it. And they're not engaging with any of the like tried and true methods that other countries have done, right? They're not willing to look at like workers' struggles in Vietnam. They're not willing to look at workers' struggles in, Cuba or Bolivia. And if they're not willing to look at those successful workers' struggles, then we're sort of doomed to follow a path of sort of disorganization that just has proven itself not to work. I mean, you can just look at the previous labor movements in the United States, for example. Basically, all it took to squash those movements was for the United States military to basically kill and or imprison some of the major leadership within those movements. And so really like anti-communism and Red Scare propaganda is a really, really big barrier to getting workers to organize within their own workplaces. And that's not to say that everybody needs to be like a super like educated like Marxist that studied all the theory, but just knowing enough to not think that communism is this ultimate boogeyman is really what it takes to understand the material power that comes with workers withholding their labor and really understanding what those demands could be. Because ultimately, the difference between like a liberal approach to unionization and like a socialist approach to unionization really rests in the question of the relationship to capital and the relationship to power. Socialists want to change the relationship between employers and employees. Socialists want to change the relationship between landlords and tenants, right? A liberal reform just asks for more concessions within the existing framework. But as long as we maintain the existing framework, that still leaves the landlords and employers with all of the bargaining chips. And then you have to find yourself fighting the same fight, every couple of decades, like we're doing right now. And so we really just have to get people to a point where when they're organizing, when they're going on strike, they understand the material power of the position they have as workers and are fundamentally asking for structural changes to the relationship that workers have with their workplace, structural changes to the relationship that tenants have to the buildings that they live in, and pushing for, cooperative models and calling for a restructuring of the way that the American political system works on the whole, because ultimately, by design, the United States was not designed to be a democracy. It was very much designed to be a dictatorship of capital. It was designed to be a democracy that was exclusively for the rich, by the rich. And you can see that in the structures of the Senate, the way Supreme Court justices are appointed. The founding fathers were actually very clear about this. James Madison talked about his opposition to what he called the tyranny of the majority, which a Marxist would refer to as the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is to say the state works on benefit of the workers to suppress the exploitation that comes with capitalists. And so without that understanding, and with all of this Red Scare propaganda that people have, really there just becomes these big hangups where people will go on strike, they'll fight for an extra $2 an hour, and then everything they fought for will be erased within 5 years of inflation.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just You have a very good ability to drop a lot of information
Oh my God.
into these are going to be really great educational clips, I think, really.
Yeah, you have a
You're
crazy memory. This is amazing.
It
Uh,
is. It's really great.
yeah.
I kind of want to, I guess, break it down to what are the three things maybe that you like for somebody that knows nothing about this? Like, what is the like intro 101? What are the three things basic things maybe that you wish people could start to learn or would know?
Yeah, yeah. So the first thing that you have to understand is that ultimately workers are the ones that hold all the power, right? Capitalists can only make money if workers are going to work. So withholding your labor is the most powerful thing that you can do to bring the economy to a screeching halt and make demands. The second thing is that when you do go on strike and when you do organize for change, you need to fight for things that change your relationship to power in the workplace. A perfect example for a starting off point, if workers are going on strike in a grocery store, for example, um, one thing that you could make in really easy, quick demand is to demand that the workers set their own schedules, right? Collectively, that management doesn't get to decide scheduling, that scheduling is done democratically by the workers, either through a communal process or through an elected representative to from the workers to do the scheduling, so that workers can be the dictators of their own schedule within the workplace, and that employers can't be the dictators of your schedule. And then the third is to understand that when you fight for these things, it is going to be difficult and you are going to be taking a risk. And the reality is that the response from especially the United States historically to different types of strikes like this is an explicitly violent one, right? It's an explicitly violent one. And so there's really an importance to make sure that if you are going to organize strikes like this, to really like demand change structurally, you need to be like, you need to make sure to keep yourself safe, right? You need to make sure to keep yourself safe, really whatever that means to you. Um, because like historically, I mean, just look at the Battle of Blair Mountain. That's a pretty extreme example where they brought in the United States military to literally kill workers who were organizing their coal mine.
Where was that?
That was in West Virginia.
Okay. Wow. Um, I would like to go back to something about China. That's all
Yeah,
right.
most definitely.
I watched one of your shorts, I believe, where you were talking about how China is actually a democracy, which you touched on a little bit ago. And the thing that went through my head, and I might just be conditioned to this, was, oh, sure, they have voting, but if anybody votes differently, they'll be killed. Like that's what I've been taught, and I haven't questioned it because I don't think about. I just haven't. I haven't delved into that. What makes that? Why do I think that, and why is that wrong?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the reason why you think that is, and it's very understandable for somebody like if you grew up in America to think that, because that is how the United States paints China. Like we paint China as though that they're like, super suppressing of dissent and things like that. And but we need to understand the reasoning for that. One of the reasons why American capitalists think that China has such extreme restrictions on freedom of speech is because American capitalists literally believe that money is speech. They literally went to the Supreme Court to prove that. China has public financing of their campaigns and they do not allow any campaign spending, right? They don't allow any campaign spending. It's all government funded. No private funding is allowed. And if they find that you have privately funded campaigning, they will nullify the election. They will nullify the election, and odds are you're going to face corruption charges. So, like, if you're an American capitalist and you want to influence the politics of China, you are going to find yourself having a very, very difficult time. But when you look at the actual process, it's really, really interesting. And to be fair, it looks a little bit sterile compared to the way we do politics here. But from their perspective, they might consider political campaigning in the United States to be vulgar. Because really, when it comes to campaigning in China, you're supposed to put up your resume and basically write a cover letter, right? That's basically it. And it's not even about promises, right? It's not about campaign promises. It's about, here is my thought process about why I think I would make a good representative. And then here's my background, and things that I have done, sort of in my personal life, that I think make myself a good candidate. That is really how campaigning is done. All of that information then is sent to the voters for the voters to look at the different candidates and then decide who they want. And China actually uses an approval voting system. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's kind of similar to ranked choice voting, but you basically mark off every candidate that you approve of, so that the candidate with the highest approval rating is the one that wins. So it looks really sterile. It looks very much like it's not political campaigns, but not every country does political campaigning like we do. And I think we have to admit that the way that we do campaigning incentivizes this sort of like, honestly, cringe, right? Like, let's be real, right? It incentivizes cringe because the easiest way to get clout and attention is to be incredibly cringe and have people attack you on Twitter and retweet you and say, wow, look at this inflammatory thing that this person said. Whereas the Chinese political system really incentivizes a sort of professionalism and a sort of reservedness, in terms of like, your job is to basically be a bureaucrat for the people to make sure that their needs get met. Um, and it's just a fundamentally different approach to politics because, and this is where it gets really wild, it only takes 50 people to initiate a recall election from a local people's Congress in China. 50 people is not that many people at all. And so these are people whose positions is very dependent on keeping as many people happy as possible. And not necessarily to make immediate short-term radical changes, but to gradually improve things over time. And so when we look at it from the United States, we see it as, well, they're not arguing with each other. They're not screaming at each other on Twitter. They're not, they're not doing these campaign ads and things like that. But it's just a different way of going about democracy. And we can have conversations about whether or not everybody thinks that that's like a good system or a bad system. But ultimately, like a lot of Americans have a tendency to call that not democracy, but I feel like it's hard to say that that's not democracy. It just has a very different approach. It's just a completely different approach. And I also want to dispel one myth. A lot of people think China's a one-party state. At the National People's Congress, there are 8 political parties that are represented, and there are, I think, somewhere around 100 representatives who are unaffiliated from any political party. And there's no requirement to be a member of the Communist Party to run for office. You just need 12 signatures. In order to run for office, you need 12 signatures of people who say, yeah, I would like to vote for this person, basically. And so it's just a really tame system that is meant to intentionally avoid the inflammatory nature of political campaigns that happen elsewhere. And the reason why the United States, once again, to wrap around to answer your question more directly, the reason why the United States claims that that is, preventing any type of political dissent, really just rests on the fact that the United States has a long history of using money to influence elections around the world. And the fact that we can't do that in China makes billionaires really mad.
Okay, I need a break. Let's talk about Star Trek. My brain is like, oh my God. So Star Trek.
You're really switching to Star Trek.
I'm pretty sure she likes Star Trek. I saw something on somewhere on her page.
I'm not I haven't really watched that much Star Trek.
God.
I'm a big dork though. I watch explainer videos. So for example, the Silmarillion, never read it. Lord of the Rings, never sat through it all in one sitting. But I love YouTube explainers that explain the plot of those movies and stuff.
So you get all the spoilers without watching.
Yeah. Oh, I love spoilers. I love spoilers.
Right. So you watch Trek Culture or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just needed a little break because my brain was that's so much. I was like, oh my God.
We can lighten it up, but I mean, fantastic information though, and
Oh my
I
God, yeah.
really, enjoyed diving into
I'll
that. And
I,
there's
and I'll be
great
watching it
clips.
a lot when I edit, so I'll get it again and again, and so it'll sink in a little bit more. Wow, yeah, jeez. Oh wow. Um, I was just like I needed like something else.
Sorry, I didn't mean to like
No, you
stonewall
didn't mess
you
me
on
up.
this.
I just like it's like it's almost like I need to defrag my brain, like you like the
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I totally understand. It's like a lot of information and it runs against like a lot of the things that we have as like assumptions about, I mean, that are built in. I mean, because the truth is like if you look at like countries like China, Cuba, the USSR and things like that, most of what Americans know about those countries doesn't even come from the news. Most of what Americans know about those countries comes from like spy movies where there are these
Yes.
cartoonish depictions of like
Mhm.
different countries around the world. And like when it comes to understanding other countries, the easiest way to rip the band-aid off is to just look at the numbers. If like think about it, right? The United States has the largest prison population in the world.
Mhm.
If China was jailing all of their the political opposition, right? You'd think that they would have a higher incarceration rate. Or you'd think those numbers would be somewhere, right? You'd think you'd be able to see some evidence of it, right? It's not like the Great Firewall of China completely prevents people from accessing Western media. They can use a VPN any day that they want to, post things on Twitter. There are plenty of like, Chinese Twitter accounts that I follow. And so just like if you look at the raw numbers, um, the United States is the most authoritarian police state that there is. We spend more on our police than any other country except for China spends on the military, right? The United States outspends every other country on police, outspends every other country on prisons. We have the biggest prison population. Um, and like that should really be, I think, one of the things to remember, that any country that we look at is going to be less of an authoritarian police state. And even if there are some policies that are restrictive in one way or another, because to be clear, is not to say any of these countries are perfect countries, like the material reality for most everyday average people, if you're an average person in China, you're going to go to your job like a normal person. You're going to go to the grocery store like a normal person, right? And you are actually less likely to interact with a police officer in China than you are in the United States. And so, like, and that's one of those things, like, to bring it back to my experience in the military, where if you don't take the time to recognize that most people in most countries are living very normal lives, um, you it's really easy to like forget that, I guess, and then it becomes really easy to just create caricatures of countries in our minds. And that's like our military depends on that. Our military depends on most people in the United States not having an understanding of people in like Iraq or Afghanistan, or Ethiopia now as things are escalating there, or Nigeria, all of these different places. Our military depends on most Americans that get recruited in the military not thinking about the daily lives of people in most countries.
Yeah, because we get really no education, like yeah, like and even like news, what you would really have to search to get that information, or you would have to have the funds to be able to travel, to be able to have those different experiences, or be in those international communities. It's not something that's easily accessible
Or you could be a
to us.
gamer.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of friends from gaming, like all over the world, and when we just chat, you learn so much about other countries that you just couldn't even imagine. Like I was saying something to one of my friends from Denmark, and we were talking about I'm in Vermont, and I was talking about a homeless person or something, and he went, "You have homeless people?" I was like, "What?" Like, yeah, we don't have that. We just don't. And like, and we're in Vermont. If you'd think that, I was talking like from a inner city or something, but I'm saying homeless people in Vermont, and he's like in Denmark. I'm like, yeah, I don't, we don't have homeless people really. I've never really seen that. And he gets paid to go to college, and like, It's
Yeah. It's stuff like that that really just kind of like is really eye-opening for a lot of Americans that like don't have the experience, you know?
yeah.
Um, and it's just like, I don't know, like for example, like because the United States is so off the board. Like if you go policy by policy, Joe Biden is politically closer to Boris Johnson than basically any political leader in Europe. But like, think about that. Boris Johnson, like, now when we think about Boris Johnson, we separate that from American politics and we're like, oh, Boris Johnson is this far right figure. But the person that was the left wing candidate theoretically in the presidential election last cycle is somebody that has policies that are nearly identical to like Boris Johnson's policies. Like it's just these types of things that we, I mean, human beings are really good at segmenting different things in our mind, we're very, very good at not drawing a lot of connections and sort of comparing our daily life to like other countries. And there's a lot of normalcy that we have. And when we look at other countries, all the assumptions of normalcy go away. Um, and so failing to connect that line that that's normal for them, all of a sudden can kind of change your perspective a lot.
Yeah, and then you go to the media companies, as someone was saying in chat. They're all controlled by money. So
Yes.
you have to turn to independent media, independent news, um, and then if you get big enough, you start to look like you might be, more of a big media company again. And so it's like you start out and you might have some credibility, and then if you become too popular, now your credibility goes down, and that's kind of like a struggle, right? You know?
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, seriously. And then there's obviously the reality where, like, I mean, independent media can go anywhere, it can go in any direction because, I mean, like, because by the very nature of being independent, right? You can get everything from, you know, you can get everything from like people who like really go out of their way to study everything before they say anything, all the way to people like Alex Jones. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Totally. I mean, I'm so happy to be working with Rena because she's a researcher and a organized person, and I'm more of a. I heard something once. I can't remember exactly what it is, but and then get kind of the gist. And there are a lot of people that just sort of go out there and just do that only, and they don't have the someone that can check stuff, check facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who do you listen to that you like for
Um,
like
oh,
media?
that is a good question. I'm kind of like, so this is where it gets really interesting. I listen to like a lot of different news outlets, but I actually consume not a lot of news, so to speak, right? So I will read through things like the New York Times and like the Washington Post and stuff like that. I'm also a big fan of like CGTN, which is really great. Um, but most of what I know about the world is like reading books, really, right? I read a lot and a lot of books because the truth is, things don't change that fast, right? For the most part, things don't really change that fast. And so, like, I think reading a lot of books to cover like the different historical background behind different countries is super, super critical because then once you have that background knowledge, then when you do engage with the news, all of a sudden you can put it in its historical context, right? And that right there is like super, super critical. I will often make this joke that being a Marxist means remembering the news from 3 weeks ago. Um, because like you'll just start to like notice things where um uh like one country that's our ally will all of a sudden become like the big enemy. So like for example, China, right? um a lot of people don't remember the pivot to Asia, but if you look at movies you can see the impact of the pivot to Asia, right? So if you go back 20 years, you look at the early 2000s, right? You can see a lot of Chinese representation in media where there's like buddy cop movies where, you know, a Chinese cop and an American cop, they're working together to like solve crimes in France or something like that. And China's painted as like, you know, an ally of the United States, and their government is painted as being friendly. And that is because, right, obviously, you know, for like the decade immediately following Deng Xiaoping's reforms in China, the United States thought that China was going to be basically working for like American capitalists to produce things for us. Then, as China started to outpace the United States in terms of economic growth, then all of a sudden you get President Obama with his pivot to Asia, which I think happened around 2012-ish. Where now all of a sudden, as China's alleviating poverty, as China's like developing their own economy, they start putting restrictions on American capital. They start enforcing stricter environmental regulations. They start enforcing stricter regulations on things like housing to make sure that like the needs of the people there are met. And they are deprioritizing capitalism and like the interests of capitalists in China. Well, then you see the pivot to Asia, and now all of a sudden you see in movies, right, like the representation of China in the media all of a sudden becomes negative. And so really like reading books and like understanding like long-term history, I think is super, super critical. And then like reading a lot of scientific research is also really helpful. Like, so for example, um, when I was working on my master's degree in biosecurity and biodefense, I had to read through the history of the politics regarding like the Biological Weapons Convention. And when you read through the history of the politics around that, all of a sudden, all of the pieces fit together really easily. So, like, historically, like the United States has been the barrier to progress when it comes to enforcing international laws, especially regarding war crimes, for a litany of reasons, but especially because if you look at the Biological Weapons Convention in particular, um, the rest of the world, you know, Russia, China, and the other major world powers that have signed on to the Biological Weapons Convention, they want an enforcement and inspection regime. They want to make sure that there's an international body that is not accountable to any one country that can investigate biological facilities and make sure that no country is making biological weapons. The United States is the country that is actively pushing against any type of inspection system or program. And so when you start to see that, and then you start to research the reason why, and it becomes like, oh, well, they're afraid that other countries are going to steal our trade secrets and develop their own pharmaceuticals. And then, you know, they're, you know, these private companies don't want, you know, outside people coming in to like look at their labs that they're working with and things like that. Then all of a sudden it starts to come into play. And when you tie that into, you know, learning about the history of war crimes that have been committed, which once again was like something I covered in my master's degree, because obviously with biosecurity and biodefense, you have to learn about the history and usage of like different chemical and biological weapons. Then you start to realize things like, you know, for example, the, you know, handful of cases where the United States accused Iraq of having chemical weapons and then bombed a baby formula factory. Or the time that literally for no reason at all, Bill Clinton just bombed a medicine factory in Sudan for no reason, right? Like they didn't even really bother to giving a pretense for that. They just, you know, it's just that the Sudanese people they just had their own pharmaceutical industry that started developing. And then all of a sudden we accused them. In that case, we didn't accuse them of anything, but we just went and bombed their pharmaceutical plant. And then Syria is the more recent example where Syria basically said, hey, we're not going to follow American patents when it comes to pharmaceuticals. We're going to develop our own pharmaceutical industry. And then all of a sudden, the United States accuses them of having chemical weapons. And so, like, these are the types of things where, like, you need to understand, like, this long-term history. You need to understand this long-term history where, um, you know, like, looking at all of that and seeing the way politics plays out internationally within spaces like the Biological Weapons Convention can sort of give you insight to the things that happen sort of everywhere else, right? And like, because the reality is, like, the United States doesn't care whether or not Syria was using chemical weapons. Like, they don't care, right? But the reason why they make the accusation public is so that they can justify bombing pharmaceutical facilities. Um, and regardless as to whether or not they actually did have or use chemical weapons, right? Just like Iraq, the United States didn't care whether or not they had biological weapons or chemical weapons. They didn't care if they were using chemical weapons. They cared that they were developing their own pharmaceutical industry.
Wow. I can I just ask change a little bit? I have a just hit me. What was your childhood like?
Um,
That is a hard transition.
Well, I'm listening to her say all this stuff, and I'm just like, I'm thinking about my childhood and how I was definitely not my path was not led to a point where I would be able to speak like this. So I'm dying to know how was your childhood? What was it like? I mean, what's your path to this point? Because I mean, yeah, it's just very impressive. So I'm just curious.
yeah, so I grew up in a really interesting situation, right? So my parents are divorced. They got divorced when I was really young. Um, my dad's side of the family has a lot more money than my mom's side of the family, but I'd never really spent much time with my dad's side of the family. And I grew up in like a really difficult household, right? Um, basically, I was living with my mom. My mom had to work about 80 hours a week for most of my life. And so I have five brothers. I have five brothers. And so I was kind of like mostly raised by my oldest brother. And it was very much like always a little bit of a concern of like whether or not the house was going to be paid off, right? Obviously, um, there's very much, kind of a little bit raised by television, a little bit raised by video games, a little bit of just nerding out and just reading books as much as I could. Um, and yeah, I don't know, it was just very, very difficult. It was just very, very difficult. Like, I don't know, like for sports, for example, I tried to do track and cross country in high school. I was a pole vaulter. But that was really, really difficult for me because like if I wanted to eat enough food to have the energy to like be a pole vaulter, I had to get a job, right? I had to get a job so I could afford like that extra food that I needed. And so, you know, like it was very much like a lot of, sleeve of saltine crackers for dinner type of situation. Um, and so, in some sense, I kind of had a lot of time to myself, but in another sense, it was a very busy household with five brothers. But it was always just this very much a lot of frustration about unfairness, right? That I kind of like saw everywhere. Because like, like it would have been nice to have like a lot more time, like it was like family time. It would have been nice to not have to deal with like, some of the abuse that I had to deal with like from my dad and stuff. It would be nice to be able to go on vacation, which I never really got to. Or like, for example, when I was in theater in like middle school, they would do like trips to like New York, right, to like Broadway and stuff like that. But like I never really got those opportunities, right? It's one of the reasons why I went into the military is because I didn't see any opportunity to go to college any other way. Um, and and so that really was kind of like how I grew up. And it's just really, really tough to say the least.
Yeah. So you were raised. You feel like you were raised by your brother mostly,
Yeah, yeah, pretty much, pretty much like that in television.
right? Yeah, me too on television.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were raised by television, but
Yeah.
thank you for being open and sharing, all of that. And I don't know if you've shared that with other shows, but I always like to say I appreciate, people sharing that, about their
Yeah,
background.
yeah, of course.
Well, it's interesting you bring up television because I've always thought it was well, see, I grew up with Captain Picard and MacGyver, and I feel like if I would have grown up with Tony Soprano, I may not have been as quite a good person. um but that brings me into the question that I was thinking about with when you watch television nowadays, do you think that the transgender community is represented well or too much or not enough, or is it ridiculous, or is it just right?
Okay, this is gonna sound ridiculous, but
Cool.
like Okay, first and foremost, trans representation in television for the most part is pretty terrible, right? Especially if you watch old shows like I do. I really love old shows, because I like there's like 6 TV shows that I watch over and over again. Um, but like for the most part, it's terrible, right? But there are 2 shows that I think have done the best when it comes to like representation of trans folks in particular. Now, to be clear, I'm not somebody that watches a lot of different television. I watch a lot of the same television over and over again. Um, but the 2 shows are Bob's Burgers, actually, and believe it or not, the few episodes with the trans character in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like despite the fact that all of the characters in It's Always Sunny are like terrible, terrible people, um, like when they had a trans character on the show for a couple of episodes, um, like the character was played by a cis woman, which is like, you know, a whole conversation, but a trans character, a trans woman in particular, being played by a cis woman is a lot better than being played by like a cis man, like to be clear. But she was the normal one, right? They were all weird and cringe, and she was just living a normal life. And so with that, I think the representation was like pretty good. And when it comes to her character, um, you know, she was obviously the hero, and the you know, It's Always Sunny gang, they were being terrible and transphobic, but their transphobia was very much painted as an explicitly bad thing. It was proof that they continued to be the terrible people that they are. Um, and so so that one I think was good. Bob's Burgers is really interesting because there's a couple of trans characters that were originally introduced as sex workers, right? Which is not great, right? There's a lot of TV that likes to represent trans women exclusively as sex workers. Um, and so, but like in like later episodes and later seasons, there's you know, a couple of trans characters that just show up, and they're just a normal part of the show, right? They're just living their best life. There was like a whole discourse about, you know, one of the trans characters um, being voiced by a cisgender man, um, which, you know, I really have mixed feelings about that. I really have mixed feelings about that because I don't always modulate my voice. Um,
I mean, in fact, sometimes in a lot of my videos, I sound like this, right? And so I think there's value in normalizing trans women not modulating their voices, right? Because it's a lot of work. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody can get like voice therapy like I can from the VA. But you know, like so like I think there's value in that type of representation, but that's like its own sort of discourse. But ultimately, they're a normal character. They're living their life. And that really is like, I mean, really what trans people are asking for when it comes to representation on television is like, you know, being trans is entirely coincidental to who they are as a person, you know?
You know, now that you mentioned that, like I was watching for a random reason Ally McBeal. Like again, because I just popped up on Hulu and I used to watch it years ago and I was like, oh, let's see what this is about. And I happened to stumble across an episode with a trans woman, you know, and of course they had her as a sex worker and you know, and all of that. But I was like, I didn't even know that Ally McBeal had an episode. But it was like very clear that like that would not fly today. Like their very like sloppy, confused attempt to like deal with, you know, to deal with this was it was kind of comical, I guess, because it was, you know, forever ago. But yeah, I mean, in that regard, it seems like the needle is moving a bit.
Oh,
But
I've
you know,
noticed it a
long way to
lot.
go.
A lot of the shows I watch, well, sorry, Star Trek. Like every show that's out now has somebody as transgender. Actually, people of all genders and all different. It's like amazing. It's like it used to be like, well, Strange New Worlds now has the heterosexual white, you know, goddess guy with the blue eyes now, but before that it was everybody was just different across the board, and it's really wonderful to see that happen because I grew up not being able to identify with a character unless they were a heterosexual male. Like I had a hard time playing the game Tomb Raider because of that, because that's how I grew up. It was just how I grew up. I didn't like it, but that's how I felt. I didn't relate. There's a game called Rust, and you're not allowed to you're not able to select your gender or how you look. So you could be anything, and you're stuck with that character forever. It's attached to your Steam ID. And that was a problem for me until a lot of things helped me normalize it more. And I'm saying this, and not I probably sound like a terrible person, but like I had to have those things changed in my life to normalize it in a separate direction because of the way I was brought up. And I'm much more I don't know if accepting is the right word. It's just more now. I don't even think about it anymore, really. It's fascinating how much I don't think about it, actually.
Yeah, most definitely. But like that's the thing. Like a lot of people see themselves in different characters, right? And a lot of people should be able to see themselves in different characters. And that's really like the reality where, you know, um, like obviously some people don't care as much and they don't care about, representation in like different ways. Um, but a lot of people do care and it does matter because ultimately, when you have representation in media, like for example, like, if you got like to roll back the clock a little bit to like, shows from like the 80s and 90s where it's like a big deal if there was like, a female character that was a doctor or a black character that was a doctor, right? Like that right there sends a message to people, especially young people who are like watching those shows that like, hey, a black doctor, perfectly normal, woman doctor, perfectly normal. And now we're, at the point where all that's normalized in our society. I mean, there are still a lot of people that are really sexist and racist towards their doctors. It's not completely gone away. But for the most part, in polite company, nobody's going to be shocked if you're a woman and you say that you're a doctor. um, you know and so when it comes to having like different characters who are like trans, who are represented, um, a lot of people are raised by television, and a lot of people, their sense of community and their sense of the world comes from television. And so it makes sense that in like video games and movies, having that representation matters. And I don't think you're canceled for, identifying mostly with the cis male characters because, you know, to some degree, right? Like the phrase, like, all the world is a stage is in some sense true. And as we sort of find ourselves throughout our life, we do sort of look at different role models, whether they be real life people in our lives or television characters, and sort of craft ourselves in the image of the people that we most admire.
Interesting. I always go off tracks, and I know Rena's probably looking at the sheet going,
Yep.
so I'll let you go back to the.
Well, now he goes off track and then he makes it hard for me to get back to this shit. Like our so sometimes it's like, well, I don't know where to go from here.
Right, because I probably touched on something that's lower down on the sheet now, and you're like, does that work right?
Yes, you did. That's why we make a good team because I'm very like we've got our questions together and we've done our research, and then Jayson's just like, how was your childhood? And I was like, that wasn't on the list, but it was nonetheless an interesting, and good question. So yeah, it's all that is to say I'm trying to figure out where we're going.
Well, I have more tangents.
Go ahead and
okay.
Are you okay with tangents?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Right.
We can go anywhere.
And
we can hard break to random stuff.
Oh yeah, there'll be no
hard break to the questions. It's all fine. Don't worry about it.
There's no segues with my brain. Because they just sort of fly up and go, hey, try this. And this will be very, very different. What is your opinion on, I believe I'm using the correct term, dead naming? I think it's what it's called when you refer to a person's name that they no longer use and does not apply to them anymore. What?
Yeah, most definitely. So for me, it's a little bit different than most trans people's experiences because I don't have a dead name, right? Like it's impossible to dead name me. I kept the name Ben, because I kind of like the name Ben, right? I feel like it suits me. And so I never really had a like desire to like change my name. Um, but like there are a lot of people that do change their name, and really this is where like this is where my background in sociology comes in really, really handy because the reality is most cultures recognize a certain degree of sacredness in names and a certain degree of like personality within names, and every society kind of has its own different approach to names, but the ultimate reality is that the ability to define yourself is something that is critical and something that rests within a name, right? It is really just central to who you are as a person. It's the first thing people hear or see when they think about you as a person, right? They think of your name, right? It's meant to reflect you. So if you refuse to call somebody by their name, you are really denying them the agency to define themselves in a really sort of deeply personal way. Um, and that I think is really, really critical and essential. So every trans person is going to have a little bit of a different, approach towards like their dead name. There are some people that will like this. So there are some trans women that will talk about when they used to be a boy or things like that. Like, and so that's not most, right? Just to be clear, but they're like, right. So everybody's got like their own unique experience with it. But the reality is like reflecting and understanding somebody's right to define themselves, right? So if for the most part, the general rule is to assume that it's never appropriate to dead name somebody, even if, right, even if you're talking about like, before they started transitioning or before they changed their name, um, really should be using their name because they didn't magically become a different person, right? They didn't magically become a different person the day that they transitioned. They just more publicly were allowed to be themselves. So the reality is with people who do have dead names, right? Even though I don't have one, if somebody says that their name is Catherine, right? That's always who they've been. They've always been Catherine. Just because people called Catherine by another name doesn't mean that she wasn't herself. And that really, I think, is something that is really important to understand because when you are dead naming somebody, you're basically claiming a certain authority over their existence that I don't think any of us rightfully have over anybody else's existence.
That is probably one of the best explanations I've actually heard. Um, I think can help people wrap their head around that, right? Like in a more compassionate, understanding way. Because I get like if you think about like not everybody likes the name their parents gave them, period. Right. Like, and so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
wouldn't like if they weren't transitioning and maybe they changed their names, you probably wouldn't dead name, that person. And so it is kind of I like the idea of explaining it to people and like this is this person's way of expressing and defining themselves and um, you should respect that.
Yeah, most definitely, 100%. And it's like, I mean, I could go into like a whole longer tangent about how, like, because capitalism has sort of like soaked itself into not only the United States, but a lot of the rest of the world, a lot of sense of ceremony and sacredness, not necessarily like spiritual sacredness, but like cultural sacredness has kind of like been evaporated. Everything has kind of been either commodified or bureaucratized. And so in that, like, there's not a surface level understanding that most like Americans have about what it means to have a relationship with your name, and like how that reflects your identity. Um, and so that's just, I think, one of the unfortunate realities of the way that like our entire culture has been commodified so that people sort of miss that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very grateful that I studied like social sciences and my focus within social sciences was anthropology, because when you learn about other cultures and the way they view things like names, um, I think it allows you to create your own meaning and your own understanding of how and what things should mean.
Wow. I one time had somebody. I was trying to understand it fully because I always try to understand things fully. It ends up being, getting to pretty into the weeds quite a bit. And one of my really good friends said, I'll leave out some of the colorful descriptions that she used, but she said, imagine you're in prison and it's the worst prison and you were suffering and it was just demoralizing and you were always hiding and your prison number was, uh, 83572. And you spend 15 years there and you get out finally. And instead of someone calling you your name, someone that used to be in the prison is like, hey, it's 83572. It would feel like, no, that's not me. No, you're wrong. That
Yeah.
was, and I thought that was another good way of describing it. And it made me really understand it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that is like a really good way of explaining because like I mean, especially when you're talking about trans people, right? Most trans people will tell you something along the lines of like, this is who I always was. I was just forced to pretend to be something else, right? And so, while it's not a physical prison, is a theoretical prison, like a cultural and societal prison of being forced to play a position in society that you don't recognize as truly yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep going. You might have you might be back on
Well, we
track.
can go back to the sheet actually.
Yeah, go for it. Also,
Yeah.
I never got a hard stop for you. I don't want to. I don't want to like keep you.
Oh no, it's not fine. I don't really have anything particular going on, so we
Okay.
can go for however long you both are planning on or
So
feel
Rena
like.
will be the one that stops
I'll be
us.
the hard stop. Probably my bladder will be the hard stop. Well, unless we
You
pause.
can go anytime you want. This is not. Don't be in pain. No, really, you could totally. I'm gonna in a sec. Everybody can. We can all take like a little break if you want. I have
That
no problem.
still is like the thing that weirds me out, like with streams of like just the level of like things that people are doing while they're streaming. And it like, hold on, I gotta go. And then what is happening? Like, I don't know. Still like, I don't know. I can't get my head around it. But anyway, like Ben, when you stream, is it a little bit more like formal or do you go, I gotta go to the bathroom? And I watched some of your stuff and it didn't look like you were doing, you were like eating soup, on the stream or
Yeah, I
anything.
mean it varies a lot. It varies a lot. Usually when I'm doing stuff with like when I'm streaming with TYT, because it's a set 2 hours, I like to make sure that I'm not taking a bathroom break during that set time block. But like also like I mean, like I just started hormones like a few days ago, right? Um, and I've been like ravenously hungry. I've been just like wildly hungry in a way that I really haven't before. I just not somebody that has normally had like a regular appetite. Um, and so like I like the other day when I was streaming on Galaxy Brain, I had to be just like, okay, I'm sorry, chat. I'm gonna eat some chicken nuggets while we're talking about stuff. But in my own personal stream, right, on Twitch, yeah, like bathroom breaks, like eating food, all that stuff, like, yeah. I mean, you just like, I mean, but that's the culture on Twitch where it's very, very casual.
Yeah, I like casual.
I know you. I guess because I've been in just probably the corporate world it's probably that. Like I just started like I wouldn't eat and I'd have back-to-back meetings and I like just started. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna eat like breakfast in the meeting and like, and even then I feel like I'm doing something so wrong. I'm like, but I just need to.
You're so wrong.
I know it's a challenge. But so anyway, I'm curious to get your take because we've got this on here. Like there's all of these transgender, laws and youth care have been, of course, like in the news cycle lately. And so, it must be taxing, to constantly hear this sort of stuff. And so I'm wondering, if you have any tips or ways that you kind of take care of yourself and your mental health amidst this never-ending news cycle that's throwing all of this stuff out there all the time.
Yeah, I guess like for me, the default go-to is reading. Like I will just like start reading books. Um, like I don't know, for me, like if I'm really stressed about something, the thing to do is to listen to music or read books and like play video games, right? And like play something mind melting, like Fortnite, where I can just goof around, or like Minecraft, where I can just goof around. Um, like, yeah, because it is taxing. It is taxing to be steeped in the news all the time. And I find myself usually at least once every 3 months, I have to take like a week off just for like my mental health, because being soaked in the news is so bad for you, especially right now. Because I mean, the reality is with all these anti-trans laws, like as somebody who is like knows a thing or two about history, it's really, really scary because it's literally Nazi propaganda. Well, like what these right wingers are pushing right now, where they're like calling everybody that they don't like pedophiles, like that's literally Nazi propaganda. Like it literally, like if you look at the propaganda that was put forward in Nazi Germany, they were literally saying that there was this evil cabal of pedophiles stealing babies. Um, and like, and it like and one of the first people that they went after were trans people, were queer people. um I mean, literally, like the first trans woman to ever receive like bottom surgery, she was killed by the Nazis, and like the doctor's office that performed the surgery was raided by the Nazis, and like they destroyed like all of the records that they could find about like all of the queer folks that that doctor had been treating. And so this is something that happened 100 years ago, right? And so like it's really scary to look back at history and see the exact same rhetoric being used today, and some of the exact same things starting to happen legislatively in different states. um like it's just really scary. So yeah, you just have to step out of it. And for me, it's reading, right? It's reading. Now most of the reading I do is political anyway, but it occupies like a different space in my brain. It's like the intellectual space of my brain, as opposed to the
Mm.
this is my life state of my brain, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually to that point, I like to give people reading lists. So like what is on your reading list? Like what are some of the things that you're reading now, or what are some of the things that you would recommend to
um
people?
Yeah, so let's see. Some of the more recent stuff that I read, like, okay, so right now, I think some of the most important books for anybody to read probably are No Shortcuts. I forget who it's by, but it's about labor organizing, the Jakarta Method, um, Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti, um, and like I mean, I'm refreshing myself right now because I'm maybe writing a book. Um, I mean, I've
Oh.
started it. We'll see when and if I finish it. Um, which is sort of supposed to be like a modern reinterpretation of Lenin's imperialism and state and revolution, with some of the information from Black Shirts and Reds and the Jakarta method in it to like sort of synthesize it all. Um, but uh, but like those I think are some of like the big ones that I think are important for people to read um right now in this moment. But there's also like a lot of other really fun stuff, like David Graeber, basically anything by him, Debt, The First 5,000 Years, The Utopia of Rules, Bullshit Jobs. All of these are like really, really amazing books that sort of talk about like the history behind where the United States is today and like the global economy, but in a way that like has a lot of really fun and interesting anecdotes, because David Graeber is an anthropologist. And I just really, really love the way anthropologists write about the world, because they always have fun stories to tie in to sort of reflect the larger material reality for societies as a whole.
So Jayson, you're gonna clip that out, and I'm gonna get that list. Like part of that's for me, I like reading, but I'm sure other people listening
I just
will
want to
wanna.
I just want to play video games with you now. Get your mind off things. You have a Steam account, right?
Yeah. You were mentioned Rust earlier. I just installed Rust and bumped into that problem. I was like, how do I change my
You
character?
can't.
Um,
Yeah, that's a toxic game. There's a lot of really mean people in that game. Just to warn you.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but yeah, I can. Yeah, yep. We'll exchange Steam IDs.
Yeah,
For
most
sure.
definitely.
That sounds fun.
That's the video game world. That is a very foreign world to me.
Oh, it's such a wonderful world.
Video games make I wasn't allowed to have them when I was a kid, so I never learned like the controls, and like now I'm just too old. They make me angry. I'm like, I
No.
can't make it do what I want it to do. And like
Uh,
it's not relaxing. It's just
well, you don't talk
I
at it.
I can't help it. I yell at like I'm the one that like somebody gave me Mario Kart when I was too old for it, and I'm like, why is it going backwards? And I'm screaming at the
Oh
character.
my God. You see,
Oh
because
my
I had
goodness.
5 brothers, right? I'm really bad at video games, but I like playing them. And I never really got good at video games because anytime that I got like to a really difficult part, I would like go to my older brothers and be like, can you beat this for me?
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
But it doesn't bother you. So you consider yourself bad at them, but it doesn't bother
Oh
you. So that's
yeah. I'm terrible. I play games to have fun. I play games to have fun. I don't play games to be good, right? Um it's like the line from Eastbound and Down, right? Like I'm not trying to be the best at exercising. I'm here to play baseball. Um
Oh, that's awesome.
I like that. Yeah, maybe I need to change my approach. But like I think I just get mad that I'm like, I'm not doing it right. And I don't know why. Like, but
yeah.
that's probably a better way to look at it. Your way. You're enjoying it.
So I'll let you go back to the list if you want.
I think we in a roundabout way we touched on a lot of things, but this is an interesting one. So people's political views sometimes can change, and evolve during their lifetime. How have your views and opinions changed, and how do you think that has shifted over time?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, literally, like, okay, when I was, this is wild, when I was 17, I went to the Republican caucus in Minnesota because I was going to be 18 before the election. So I knew that I was allowed to be there. And then, literally, over the course of that summer, I learned that all of the Republican candidates were against gay marriage. And I thought that was pretty cringe. So congratulations to 13-year-old me. Then after that, became like a Ron Paul supporter. And I was like, Ron Paul seems cool. He's probably in favor of gay marriage. He's a libertarian, right? And well, then I found out that he was against gay marriage too. And then so by that, like by the election day, I actually ended up voting for Obama. Um, and and then from there, right? From there, I started reading like a lot of Noam Chomsky and stuff like that. Started watching like the Young Turks. And I had already been watching the Young Turks a little bit at that point. Um, but then I sort of kept going like further and further to the left, like especially once I went into the military, that ripped the band-aid off a lot for like the United States role in the world. Um, and then like for a brief period of time, I called myself like a libertarian socialist. Before I started, like, I mean, literally one of my best friends, like one of my absolute best friends in the world, Grom, uh, he's another Twitch streamer. Um, uh, um, like he asked me to like outline my ideal model of democracy, and it was basically like this tiered delegation system of like you vote for like a local representative that's definitely on board with you, publicly financed campaigns, all this stuff. And then they just send representatives up where the local is in charge of a ton of stuff. But the central government, right, exists basically to make sure that all of the local governments have what they need to do their jobs. And when I explained that, he was like, you just like reinvented like Soviet style democracy, right? Like, that you just reinvented what like most Marxist countries use. I was like, oh, and then I started diving into like Marxist theory. And then that's, where I am today.
I like the willingness to evolve. That like I feel like a lot of people, some people have that, but a lot of people, just kind of learn one thing and they stay in one place. So I think that's really interesting that you kept diving in and doing more research and things were evolving as you were learning.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, a lot of it stems from I mean, sort of like a lot of it stems from the beliefs that I have about myself, right? So I know me enough to know that I'm actually a very slow learner. I'm an incredibly slow learner, which sometimes is very, very frustrating for the people around me. Um, but like because I recognize that about myself, I think that gives me like a little bit more ability to like change my mind and learn, just because I do honestly believe that believing yourself to be a smart person is sort of a dangerous thing to believe, right? If you have it as part of your identity that you're a smart person, whenever you find yourself wrong, instead of challenging where you're wrong internally and changing your mind, you will sort of fall back on, well, I'm a smart person. I can't be wrong. They must be the one that's wrong. Um, and so that mentality, the desire to keep up an image of yourself as being a smart person actually becomes one of the biggest barriers to learning. And so that really is why, for me, I kind of try to surround myself with people who I want them to prove me wrong, right? And once again, this can very much annoy a lot of my friends a lot of the time, because I'll come up with an idea and I'll say, hey, what do you think of this idea? And then they're like, oh, I think it's fine. And I'm like, okay, but am I wrong? Like, please tell me how am I wrong? What am I missing? Right. And I will actively seek out where I am wrong. Because once again, I know I'm kind of a slow learner and I want to know where I'm missing something, because I feel like on my first pass of a thing, I might miss something, and I probably will miss something. That's why like some of my favorite books, I have read them like 3 or 4 times to try and like fully understand everything that they're saying. So in that sense, I think it's a little bit of an advantage for me to not only be a slow learner, but to know that I'm a slow learner.
Wow.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that point where if your identity is I'm smart, I know you're like there's a wall up and you're not listening to other thoughts, takes, facts, maybe. Uh and I think that is a problem for sure. But it sounds more like you're a lifelong learner, which is really important.
Yeah, it's honestly my favorite thing. Like it's my favorite thing. Like one of the reasons I really just genuinely do love reading and I love learning things. And so like for me, when I was working on like my degrees, I did that while I had like full-time employment in like other ways, right? I literally got my bachelor's degree done in about a year and a half. Um, because that was like my recreation, right? That was like my fun thing to do, was to just like soak myself in learning things.
Um, do you mind if I read a question from chat?
Oh, most definitely.
Let's see, where is it? It is right. On hormone therapy. Why recently, and what is it like?
Yeah, okay. So why recently? I kind of have always been baby crazy my whole entire life. And it takes a long time to schedule appointments to save what is necessary to save what is necessary to have kids. So that appointment took a really long time to schedule, because for whatever reason, like the facility that does the cryopreservation was like super, super booked. So it just took like a ridiculously long time to get that. And what is it like? Like honestly, like I don't know, like honestly, like I'm kind of in like the early stages of it, you know, and I'm really, really excited about it. I'm really, really excited about it. But there's just obviously just different like changes happening in my body that normally people experience as teenagers when they get excuses for being cringe because they're teenagers. Um, um, you know, it's, I mean, you literally have to go through a whole second puberty. But like so far, I'm really excited. Like I think I've already seen like an improvement in my skin. Um, like uh like my brain has been a little bit all over the place, but that's just because like, you know, once again, very early on in this. Um, the biggest thing really is just like my skin being a little bit different, like my sense of temperature changing a little bit, but that's pretty normal. Um, and like just sort you're just normal kind of like side effects, I guess. Food tastes better though. Food tastes so much better. It's wild, right? Um, like because like estrogen quite literally does change your sense of smell and taste. And believe it or not, women actually have like more sensitive senses of smell and
I've been
taste.
saying that for
Um,
years and no one believes me.
It's
I'm
true.
very
it's true.
sensitive
There's
to
a
smell.
yeah. There's a
I
lot of
agree.
research into it.
Having been with many women, they definitely smell a lot more things.
So yeah, so like my appetite is better. Um, you know, I'm definitely a lot more hungry than I had been before. But that's not consistent for everybody. It kind of varies a little bit. Um, but yeah, like food tastes better.
Mm, interesting. Huh. So let me guess, you're colder now than you used to be when you said temperature.
I just kind of get like, I mean, just randomly, just like all of a sudden being like, wow, I'm like 1,000,000 degrees right now.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I've always been kind of like a lizard person. I keep my apartment, okay, I keep my apartment at like 80 degrees year round.
Wow.
Um, I
Wow.
know a lot of people like it a lot colder than that. I'm very lucky that my fiance also likes the apartment to be 80 degrees year round.
That's the key to a
S-
successful relationship, liking the same
yeah,
Temperature.
temperature.
I mean,
That's so
honestly though,
interesting.
like
Oh, wow.
literally, I would lose my mind if it drops below 75 degrees. Like my bones hurt. I can't deal with it. Like it's like physically painful to be in the cold, and it's just so debilitating. I need it to be super warm. Um, but like, you know, with like the estrogen, like changing things up a little bit, like there's just random moments where I'm like, oh my God, I'm 1,000,000 degrees right now. But like once again, I think that's just kind of like, I think that's probably a transitory thing because I am pretty early on in it. So
What are your thoughts on how old someone should be to be able to make the decision to start doing like more, transitional therapies?
I mean, honestly, I feel like this is just a very, very personal decision. Like for me, I don't really have any regrets about not transitioning earlier because like I said, right, I do really want to be a parent. And so like getting to the point like financially, um, getting to the point where like I can actually, you know, have like the cryopreservation, um, so that I can have kids of my own. But really it really varies, right? It really just depends on like what a person feels, right? It really depends on, you know, what is important to them, right? Not everybody wants to have kids, right? That's not something that everybody cares about. And so like, and even then, you know, like in some sense, would it have been nice to grow up in a different environment where I could have transitioned a lot earlier, maybe had a lot easier time passing? Um, yeah, that would be cool. That'd be really, really cool. Um, but I'm not really the type of person to look back at my life and really regret anything, so to speak, because I feel very, very lucky where I am in my life right now. I feel lucky to have the apartment that I have, to have the fiance that I have, right? She's a really lovely, amazing person. And if my life was different, I don't think I would have met her, right? If, you know, and so like I'm not really a person that really has like regrets. Just because even the things that like I in some sense wish that I didn't do, like it would have, you know, it would have been nice to learn what the military was really like and what the United States really was before I joined, so then I wouldn't have. Um, but at the same time, I also feel incredibly lucky to be where I am today. Um, but so when it comes to people making their own decisions about when they want to transition, really, I think it's completely up to them. It's completely up to, you know, what their hopes are. And even then, like when you're talking about like cryopreservation, that's not something you have to wait terribly long for, right? That's like something where, you know, you can do that as a teenager. Um, and so like really people should be able to like transition as early as they know and feel like.
There isn't a too young, you think?
I mean, like you know, because I mean, like think about it like this, right?
Mhm.
The earliest anybody is going to transition, like the earliest any doctor will let anybody transition, is puberty, right? Is the normal age that anybody else would go through puberty, because like the reality is, well, like with trans people, right? Like if you're trans, and you transition later in life, you're forced to go through two puberties, right? Um, so like it's a lot easier for people. It's a lot easier for people if they only have to go through one. So like when it comes to like young people, the youngest anybody's going to transition is around the time that they would start puberty, which usually you can start seeing signs of like, oh, you know, they're starting to go through puberty. Let's, you know, start hormone therapy so that instead of going through this puberty, they go through the right puberty, right? So they can be themselves. Um, that is as early as it will ever be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I hear a lot of conversations through my 17-year-old daughter about, you know, kids at school, and parents will chime in on Facebook chats and stuff about what they should and shouldn't be doing, and I was just like, wow, that'd be a really interesting question to ask you. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um for sure. Wow. Yeah.
It always blows my mind that people that are like not in that situation, or that's not their lived experience, they have so many opinions on what people should and shouldn't do. And I'm like, but you, it's not even relevant to you. Like you're not even, what do you, just live your own life and let other people live
Yeah.
their. It's just,
Yeah. No, seriously. Because like, I mean, like, and I mean, you can figure out really quick like how dishonest these people are when you look at like, honestly, like they will talk about like, oh, you know, but don't you want to have kids, right? Now they completely ignore all of the things that you can do so that you can have kids, right? Like cryopreservation, for example, they'll just ignore that as a potential option. Um, uh, but ask these same people if they think trans people should be allowed to have kids. You know? So is it
yeah.
really about, oh, you're so concerned about people being able to have kids? I know, I don't
Yeah.
think so. It's just that they don't want people to be trans, you know? It's that.
It's that way with abortion too. We want, you know, sanctity of life, and then when the baby's born, all help is cut off. It's like
Mm-hmm.
everything's always a contradiction, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't even have formula now. But nope, let's force people to give birth.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just, you know, like, and that really is like the thing. Like, do you want to force people to go? Because, like, in their personal experience, to them, puberty was nothing. That was just like, okay, yeah, puberty. That's like a thing that happens to everybody. Um, but if you think about it in the context of like how, like, I mean, think about it. Like, imagine you woke up one day, right? Like, so, like, I'm gonna make the assumption that both of you are cisgender, right?
Yes.
Um, if you both woke up, right, and all of a sudden you are going through as an adult the wrong puberty, right? That would be pretty distressing, right? That would be pretty
Yeah.
concerning, right? You'd probably go to a doctor and be like, what is happening? This isn't right. Um, and you'd probably get on hormones to stop the wrong puberty from happening. Um, so, and then imagine forcing like a 13-year-old to go through that, right? Like, it, believe it or not, doesn't make it any less concerning, right? It doesn't make it any less concerning. So like that really is like what I wish more people understood. Um, that's what I wish more people understood. Um, because like when you think about it in that context, it makes perfect sense. Like it would be very alarming if you started going through the wrong puberty. So why do so many people think it's acceptable to like let kids have to go through the wrong puberty if they're trans?
Yeah, that makes sense. You're
You
right.
know?
There's a follow-up question to the therapy on chat. You've talked a lot about second puberty. Do you have a plan in place to help support you through this experience?
Not really. And like I guess not really a plan um other than like just continuing to live my life really. I mean, like my fiance is super supportive, obviously like I work with TYT, they're super supportive and awesome. My Twitch audience is super supportive and awesome. So it's not really any like drastic change for me in that regard. So there's I think very little in that sense to plan around. Um but yeah, I mean that's kind of, I mean there is like a little bit of a concern of like, will it be illegal to be trans in the United
Oh my
States in the next
God.
5 years? So there is like a little bit of planning in the sense of like, what if I do need to move out of the country? um but that's kind of besides the point. That's kind of like, I think probably not exactly what they were asking in terms of the question. But I can't really speak to anybody else's experience, but I'm in a very, very lucky and privileged position where all of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis are incredibly supportive.
I just have to step in here for a second. Every time that cat gets on the desk, something happens,
Yeah.
and you're allowing it.
No,
Just I've seen it.
yeah, he's bad.
It's really never not gone badly.
I know. I'm trying to like hold him on. This is Oliver Dennis. He's bad.
But can recycle, just so you know.
Oh yes, my cat and dog recycle. That's a weird thing that I do. But I'm glad that it's really nice to hear that you have a supportive work community, a supportive, social community. Like that's really awesome, because I know a lot of people don't have that space.
Yeah.
I'm kind of focused on keeping the cat.
Okay, I have a
Jayson, so if
question.
you-
No, I have a question that I always like to ask. It's a little out there. It's hypothetical, and it's a bit sci-fi. So hypothetically, you're sitting in where you are right now, and through the door comes someone that, this would be very interesting because you may not know, but someone that looks just like you says, I'm from the future. You have to come with me right now. And they're disheveled, dirty. They look like they've been through something. What do you do?
Oh my God. Okay, this is really funny. My fiance just asked me this like the other day.
What?
Yeah, no, literally.
That's insane.
And I was like, the first thing I asked her was like, well, can you come with me? And she was like, well, no, it's you. They're going for you. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to go to the future. So I feel like I kind of have the same answer. Like I probably would ask a lot of questions, like why am I going to be able to come back? Like those kinds of questions, like, because really I don't know if I would just default go.
Okay,
Um,
so you're assuming that
like,
that they're going to bring you to the future when all they said was, "Come with me right now." So that's interesting. I've never heard that's interesting take. You're right.
I mean, if I don't have to go to the future, if I'm just following them, then I'll be like, okay, we're going on a day trip. What's the plan?
What are me and me doing?
Yeah, lottery tickets. Are we?
Oh my God, that's true. They could be coming back to
Yeah.
get you to get lottery. Oh wait, no, they'd be
Yeah,
telling you.
I
They'd
mean,
be
I
telling
would
you
do
the
that in a
numbers.
heartbeat. Yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat. I'd be like, give me those numbers. Okay, we're gonna like get millions of dollars, start a housing co-op. Let's go.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Oh, awesome. Thank you. I someday if we're ever at a point where a lot of people watch, people will be ready for that question. But apparently you were ready for that question absolutely for just a complete coincidence. That's insane. You just were asked that, you said. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah. But like my fiance does that all of the time. Like she'll ask me questions like, like, what would you do if you woke up and you were like 5 inches tall or something like that? All the time, like basically every single day. Like there's like at least two or three of like hypotheticals like that.
So what would you do?
I know. I was just thinking the same thing.
I don't know. I don't know. I would just like I would become a VTuber. I would become a VTuber
There's a
and just
lot
like
to go
shout into my
between.
microphone,
There's a lot between waking up at for 5 inches tall and becoming a VTuber, though. You got to get by the
Yeah, yeah,
cat in her house, in my house.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure Claudia would help me out a lot, like
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. That's going to be my new question.
Yeah, those are good. I like that. That stranger that looks like you. Come with me. That's a good one. I think
Yeah.
we'll have to.
I've been
ask
asking
that
it since I was
regularly.
like 13.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I would be really skeptical of time travelers right now because like look, let's be real. Look, if time travel is real, that means like the fascists already won. Like, let's be real.
Oh
If time
God.
travel is real,
Oh God,
right? With
yeah,
the
that's
timeline that we're on, okay,
Oh,
there's no way you have a good person that's going back in time to make things better. Okay. Like
that.
if there was, if there was like a really cool time traveler, would Operation Paperclip happen?
Mm,
Like, are you kidding? Like, I mean, let's like if you're a time traveler out there, it is your moral responsibility to teach indigenous folks in North America how to make AK-47s before 1942 or 18 or 1442, 1492. Okay. Like, just
wow.
saying.
No, that's true. I never really thought about it. Yeah, if time travel was possible, things you'd hope would be better.
Yeah, yeah. So scary thought,
Huh.
Um,
I like that you spoke directly to the hypothetical time traveler, though. Like,
They're in
yeah, oh,
chat
I mean,
actually.
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
They'll know where to find us. If they're in the future, they'll know.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
So we've got one more on this list that I think is a good one, is interesting. So we heard you're going to be debating Charlie Kirk at the end of
Yeah,
the month.
yeah,
So
yeah.
tell us about that. How did that come about, and where can people check that out?
Yeah, so I know it's definitely gonna end up on Charlie Kirk's YouTube channel. I really should have been more responsible and figured out all of the information around how to find it, like if it's live. Um, but I mean, it really started when Charlie Kirk sent me a DM on Twitter almost a
Mm.
year ago now, and he was like, "Do you want to debate?" And I was like, "Sure." And then and then he didn't reach out to me for like months, and then somebody from his staff reached out to me. Somebody from his staff reached out to me. Um, to like schedule the debate, and then and then it happened, and so it's going to be about Marxism in America, which is really interesting, to say the very least. To say the very least. Um, and like, to be honest, so normally, sort of out of principle, I don't really do debates, right? Like personally, I think that like there's a lot of very toxic culture around debates, right? There's a lot of very toxic culture around debates, and unfortunately debating is the easiest way to like sort of clout form. because like it's the center of controversy and conflict and things like that. Very often you have like these extreme right wingers who use debate as a really easy way to build their audiences, because once again, like we talked about earlier, being cringe is the easiest way to grow your audience, right? That's if you want to be the main character on Twitter, you say something absolutely vile and everybody will quote tweet you. And unfortunately, there's a lot of right wingers that see that and then follow you. So it's really easy to build like a following that like that. And so the incentives around debates are very much to create as much cringe as possible. So generally, out of principle, I don't do them because like the way debates typically go is you'll have somebody on the far right debating somebody who is maybe nominally on the left. Very often, they don't know exactly what they're talking about, and they sort of are sort of very often follow sort of typical Democratic Party platitudes, where they'll like quip back with like a lot of, more like liberal talking points, and then they end up kind of talking past each other. Very often you'll have people who say that they like stand for the left, but then will like cede ridiculous ground. Like they'll bring up like random things on the left that they disagree with to try and build like common ground with like extreme right wingers. um and like all of those things are just terrible, and it creates a really really terrible culture and environment around debating. So generally I don't do it, right? Generally, I don't do it. But in this case, um, I don't think Charlie Kirk has ever debated a Marxist before. I don't think that, you know, it, I'm definitely not platforming Charlie Kirk in any sense. Like, I can't give Charlie Kirk a bigger audience. He already has like a pretty big audience. It's much bigger than mine right now. Um, so the risk in it, the cost in it, I think is very little. And with the mentality that I'm coming in with, um, I think it's just gonna be a little bit different than like most of the way debates like that happen. But as a general rule, I sort of discourage people from engaging in that type of debate, but it doesn't stop anybody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it seems like a lot of the tactic is like whoever's the loudest and like that
Yeah,
seems
yeah.
to be who. And as we're talking to you, like you're very grounded in fact and history and research, and so I don't get that impression from Charlie Kirk from what I've seen from him. So I'm wildly curious to see how like this is gonna go. Do you kind of have a plan? Like, what if there's like yelling and, like, do you have sort of a game plan, I guess, for
I mean, I
how
don't
to
really plan
tackle?
on yelling. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like part of what they do is, oh, if you yell, that means that you lose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're getting angry, and so if you're the one that's angry, upset, then you lose. But like the reality is, like a lot of right wing talking points are just funny, right? They're just hilarious, like they're ridiculous, right? Like like a perfect example, right? When they talk about how evil communists are, they'll say like, oh, there's like 100 million people killed by communists. Um, and it's like who? You mean like the Nazis that died in World War II? Like, oh yeah, those poor innocent victims, of the USSR, like when when they were rolling their tanks into Germany. Oh, we all feel very bad for the Nazis. Or like, oh, Fidel Castro like stole my family's farm. And it's like, okay, but you know what the conditions of work were in those farms, right? Like straight up, like you're not going to be Fidel Castro's the evil one for taking your family's plantation, right? Like I'm sorry, I just have a hard time feeling bad for you. um but like, and so you know the problem is, right, and now you can see the issue where if you have somebody that's like a liberal, right, claiming to be on the left, they will be like, oh no, you're totally right, Fidel Castro was like the most evil person in the world. um then they'll concede like ridiculous ground, and then they're talking from the same political side as the fascists they're debating, as opposed to like, hey, think about it for a second. Do you think Nelson Mandela was a good guy, right? Like now in the United States, luckily, culturally, most people are like, well, obviously Nelson Mandela was a good guy. Well, what did Nelson Mandela think of the USSR? What did Nelson Mandela think of Fidel Castro? I mean, like literally, Nelson Mandela considered Fidel Castro a close friend and inspiration. So, is Fidel Castro like a bad person? I'm so confused. Do you think Nelson Mandela is a bad person? Or maybe do people believe a lot of lies about Fidel Castro? Maybe perhaps the people that owned the companies that Fidel Castro nationalized don't have an unbiased opinion about the nationalization policies. But who does, have a pretty good opinion of Fidel Castro is the millions of people that previously couldn't read and now they can read because of his national literacy program. But like that's the type of thing where, once again, if you have somebody that like claims to be on the left but still is like a believer in capitalism and like hasn't really learned all the history, they'll be like, oh no, you're totally right. Like oh yeah, oh evil dictator, right, that taught people how to read. Oh,
Yeah, isn't that what Bernie got in trouble for?
Yeah, Bernie got in trouble for like, hey, their healthcare program works, their literacy program works, this is great. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you have all of these like people who are like,
Yeah.
no, Fidel Castro is terrible.
Yeah.
Don't you understand? He took away like our sugar companies,
I don't know what you have left, but I do have one definitely question that's been bothering me the whole time. What is it that makes you a dork?
What is it that makes me a dork?
Yeah, like the Star Trek's out, so I'm trying to figure it out. Like video games, maybe. Like, but what else?
I think it's just that I like I'm just obsessed with reading and like learning things, and like I'm just not very in tune with like television really. Like there's TV that I watch a lot of TV, but it's a lot of the same TV, right? Like Adventure Time. I love Adventure Time. Adventure Time, Steven Universe, the
Okay.
regular show, I'm watching that again, Avatar: Last Airbender, that kind of stuff. I was a big Stargate nerd. A big Stargate nerd.
Me too.
Like it's just difficult. It's just difficult. Some episodes of Stargate are really tough to sit through.
Yeah.
And then like the last, I think 3 or 4 seasons are tough to sit through because like it's very obvious that the person that replaces Jack O'Neill in Stargate. I don't know if you remember.
I remember it very well. I don't remember his name, but I know what you're talking about.
If you're paying attention to the show, it's very obvious that he's like really racist, but the type of racist where he definitely thinks that he's not racist at all, right?
Interesting.
Like, yeah, I mean, look at it. Like literally, like he's the type of person that will you can see it in the way that like
he was that way with other races. Yeah, you're right. Like I was thinking Earth, but you can be in that show. You're racist to aliens too. So like, yeah, okay, I actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, it's just like really like, like that's just like, okay, buddy, right? And it was just like that. So it gets hard to sit through when you notice like things like that, and it's just but all in all, I kind of really like Stargate, especially like as somebody who's raised Catholic. Like the whole
so
like this is where I kind of like the last few seasons, where like the last few seasons are really a criticism of like Catholicism.
Yeah.
And it was just really, really interesting. But yeah, so I guess I'm I'm.
And you went through it. You liked Atlantis and Stargate Universe as well.
Yeah, I only got 1 or 2 seasons into Stargate Universe, and I've never sat through and watched all of Atlantis. Because like to me, my favorite character was always Daniel Jackson. Like Daniel Jackson was always my favorite character, and so anything that doesn't have him in it is less likely to capture my attention.
Yeah, and he left like 6th season, I think, in the first series, and then he came back like every once in a while, kind of a thing. Yeah. That was a bummer.
Yeah, and I mean his relationship with Vala was amazing.
Yeah,
like I
absolutely.
love that whole dynamic, but it only existed for like a season, basically.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to know. I had to know where the dork was and the nerd. That's how I relate.
Oh, We're over the 2 hour
Yeah,
mark, and
I'm good.
we did go through everything on the sheet with some detours. So I feel like this has been really interesting. I've really
Yeah.
enjoyed chatting with you, Ben. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us. And
Yeah, this was really great. This is really great.
Yeah,
Let
it's
me
a
know when it's
blast.
up. Like the video is posted on YouTube. I'm gonna share it around.
Yeah,
do
definitely.
you
Well, the
wanna?
live will be immediately.
Yeah, but do you
Oh,
want to give
okay.
people your handles, or like where they can watch and follow you?
Yeah, most definitely. So you can follow me on Twitter at benjamincarolla. You can follow me on Twitch, bleepblompben on Twitch. And then you can catch my show on my show Galaxy Brain every Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern on TYT's Twitch channel. Yeah, those are like the best way to find.
Yep, and
Theoretically, I'm on TikTok, but I haven't posted there in a while.
all those are also in our description right now, just so anybody knows. I'm on it. I put it all in the description.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was fantastic. You're a wonderful person. I
Thank you so much
really,
for having me
I
on.
really enjoyed it.
I
Yeah.
am looking forward to watching that debate with Charlie Kirk.
Oh yeah,
Well, I'm pretty excited for it. So
awesome.
Mhm.
All right, cool. So do you want to end, or do you want to talk after, or like because I'll just keep going. I have nothing else
I
to
know
do.
you will go forever, and I'm like, I have to I don't know. I tap out
Okay,
after like
fine.
2 hours.
We'll
I'm
just end.
like, I'm not staying on here all night, Jayson.
All right. Well then, for everyone that's watching, thank you so much for watching. And look towards the edited versions, because I'll be cutting this into segments and shorts and all kinds of fun stuff. And talk to you later.
All right. Thank you, everybody.